The Texas Rangers have signed Andrew Heaney to a 2-year deal. Now, what does this mean for the Rangers rotation? They have their 2 pitchers. Are they still hungry for more? We'll get into all that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan since 2010, the founder and host for all 4 seasons of this Locked On Rangers podcast. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers and subscribe on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment any single thing below. Now, Andrew Heaney is a Texas Rangers. Texas has their second starting pitcher they have signed in free agency. Now, who is this guy and what does it mean for the Rangers rotation? Well, Andrew Heaney is a 31-year-old from Oklahoma City who was drafted in the first round by the Marlins back in 2012 out of Oklahoma State University. So he is technically kind of a local kid coming off one of his best, if not his best, career season with the Dodgers. Had a 3.10 ERA in 72 2/3 innings and struck out 110 batters. Fantastic left-handed pitcher who was fantastic at getting swings and misses out of the zone, getting chases, and not walking a lot of guys. Those are the things that he does well. The Rangers signed him to a 2-year, $25 million deal, so I think that's $12.5 million per year. I think there might be some catches on it, but I'm pretty sure everything that I've seen so far is just guaranteed 2 years, $25 million. Bing, bang, boom, done. Where does he slot into this Rangers rotation? I'd say he's probably somewhere after John Gray and Martin Perez. I know he might have had a little bit better season on paper. Some people might think his success last year in a career is more sustainable than Martin Perez. I don't think so. I still think Martin is the Rangers' number 2 at this point. But I think this is a pretty solid signing. I really like it. It's not someone who I expected the Rangers to sign because, again, he only pitched in 72 innings last year, has not been a guy who has been a workhorse in his career, only pitched over 110 innings twice in his career. The career high is 180 innings he hit in 2018 as a member of the Angels, was a longtime member of the Angels. You might remember him from those years. In 2021, he was traded midseason from the Angels to the Yankees. He was terrible on both teams. This year signed a 1-year deal with the Dodgers and was fantastic for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Granted, in a bit of a limited sample size as kind of their number 5 starter. But when he was healthy, he was really, really good for the Dodgers this year. Some of the other concerns about him besides his availability, he had a shoulder injury that was nagging that made him miss a lot of time. He only made 1 start from April 18th to July 6th, and in only 6 of his 16 outings did he go 5 or more innings. So he is not a guy who is going to pitch very deep into games. Did have a few 6+ inning outings last year, but really, you're not getting any more from him than 6 outings. That's on a very, very good day. I believe he only had 2 outings where he went 6 innings last season. But in both of those, he had double-digit strikeouts and, 2 or fewer earned runs. So both of those were quality starts, 2 of 16 quality starts. Now, it may not sound like a lot. You may think, okay, well, why the heck did the Rangers pay this guy? Well, it's kind of a gamble on a guy who has shown a propensity, at his best to be a very, very good starting pitcher. He did throw a lot fewer pitches last year. I think part of that, I'll have to look a little bit more into it, talk to some of the people with the Dodgers who watch the Dodgers more often than I did this year. But it seems like he wasn't a guy who was allowed to go through the order a certain number of times. It seems like that was his limit. He is a guy who, again, has had the injury issues, and so maybe that kind of limited his pitch count, but he didn't have a whole lot of games where he didn't have any games this year where he threw 100 pitches. He had 91 was his high this season. He only hit 90 twice this year, and then he hit 89 a couple other times, 85, 86, and then somewhere in the 60s or 70s for most of the other starts. So this guy is not someone who you're going to throw very, very deep into games, but I think that can also be said of someone else that the Rangers have in Jake Odorizzi. I think it kind of signals something about how the Rangers are going to use those guys And I do like the signing, even if he isn't healthy. It is a bit of a gamble, and I do think that he can provide a whole lot of value. And it's just all a matter of, is he healthy next year? Some of the projections are very, very different for the two main sites that I use, at least looking at them on Baseball Reference. It projects him for a 4.33 ERA next year in 104 innings, and giving up a whole bunch of home runs in 1.6 per 9 innings, which, again, that is also something that he's struggled with in his career. Has given up a lot of home runs this year. Didn't give up nearly as many, but still does give up quite a few per night. I believe Fangraphs have him at 130 innings, and of course, the second I try to click on their website, it stops actually loading. So we'll get back to that in just a second. But if you look at some of his Baseball Savant numbers, they are really, really pretty. The top quarter of baseball in walk rate, in terms of whiff rate, strikeout rate, and chase rate, all in the top 4% of baseball. It gets a lot of swing and misses. The highest chase rate induced as starting pitchers last season, minimum of 500 out of the zone pitches. This is all on outside of the zone pitches. So Kevin Gossman, 39.7%. Jacob deGrom, who is also a Texas Ranger, 37.5%, and Andrew Heaney at number 3 at 36.9%. So the Rangers are going all in on guys who can strike guys out, and that is something that you absolutely love to see, because those are the guys who do really, really well in the playoffs, is the guys who can get those big strikeout rates when you need him. Now, he is going to be 32 next season and 33 at the end of this contract, so he's not old. He's not old necessarily. Doesn't have the biggest work rate on him because he has been so injured for most of his career. I mean, in 2016, he made 1 start. In 2017, he made 5 starts. Did have that 30-start season where he went 180 innings. In 2018, only a 4.15 ERA. Maybe that was partly due to pitching for the Angels, and that just makes everyone worse. Or maybe it was just the barometer for what he is as a pitcher. Doesn't matter. This year was a really, really good year, and the Rangers are betting on him repeating it. But what does that mean for the rest of this Rangers rotation? I don't think it means they're done, and let's look at what this means for the importance of some of the other options out there. But first, today's episode is brought to you by SimpliSafe. At Locked On Rangers, we believe home should be where you and your family feel safest, especially over the holidays. This season, give yourself and your family the gift of peace and protection with the #1 rated home security system, SimpliSafe. And right now, SimpliSafe is offering Locked On Rangers listeners 40% off a new security system. But don't put this off. Here is why you'll love it. In an emergency, 24/7 professional monitoring agents use Fast Protect technology exclusively from SimpliSafe to capture critical evidence and verify the threat is real so you can get a higher priority police response. SimpliSafe is a whole home security with advanced sensors for every single room, window, and door. Don't miss your chance to save big on my favorite security system. Get 40% off any new system at simplysafe.com/lockedonmlb. That's simplysafe.com/lockedonmlb. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Now, the Rangers have another lefty in this rotation. They have a second lefty in this rotation to go along with Martin Perez. But I don't think this means the Rangers are done. Initially, I thought, maybe this means that they're not going to get anybody else, but I kind of turned the other way because he is so injury prone. He is a more injury prone player than Jacob deGrom. He has a longer history of that, and I think it's a bigger gamble on him. Granted, fewer years, less money, but I do still think it is the biggest gamble the Rangers are taking. Now, there we go. Fangraphs has finally started cooperating, and he is projected to pitch 140 innings. And of course, the second I see that, it just goes blank. Maybe Fangraphs is just shutting down. Maybe the Andrew Heaney demand, the obsession people have over this exciting signing, is just crashing the entire Fangraphs site. I don't think so. And let's see. Oh, and as I'm recording this, Cody Bellinger is off the table. He has signed a deal with the Cubs, a 1-year, $17.5 million contract. So there goes that option for the Rangers. It does still leave some of the other short-term signings, like maybe maybe it makes a Joey Gallo signing a little bit more likely, but I do think it actually makes another outfielder more likely to sign with the Texas Rangers, and I think it is a signal that they're going to spend more money on the outfield and maybe pair this signing up with another mid-tier rotation and just kind of go the depth route and just have as many options as possible. I think it frees up some money more for Brandon Nimmo. It kind of seems like they might be moving away towards thinking they can sign Rodon as well, which again, initially before the offseason started, I thought, all right, if you can get one of deGrom or Rodon, that is amazing. Best case scenario. And then I started thinking, okay, maybe you do want more. And I was a little bit, wary of signing deGrom or Rodon to pair with deGrom because of his injury history. Now, Heaney has just as lengthy, if not more lengthy, of a history of injuries. And unlike Rodon, Heaney wasn't healthy last season. He was pretty good last season, but he was not healthy. So I think this means they are going for the safer route, the more the less flashy, but I think still very good players. I think this means a target of Chris Bassett and Brandon Nimmo are kind of moving more towards the top of their list. I think somebody is going to be willing to do that 6th year, maybe average $30 million annual value. For Carlos Rodon, I'm less sure that it's going to be the Texas Rangers. It still could be. It still very much could be, but I think they are kind of going with the depth. So someone like a Jameson Taillon, who a lot of people have thrown out, who I think is fine, would not be my first choice, not second, third, or whatever. Even in that mid-tier, he was not my first choice mid-tier guy. If you were going on one of the guys on who should have been on the cheaper end, Heaney honestly would have been up there. I didn't really think about it too much because I was kind of thinking I was still so worried the Rangers wouldn't get one of those top 3 starters. They did, and so the what now conversation kind of moves into a different. You look at things with a little bit different of a perspective. But as of right now, the rotation looks like this: Jacob deGrom, Martin Perez, John Gray, Andrew Heaney, Jake Odorizzi. Then those are your 5. And if you're looking for guys after that, because usually one of those guys ends up getting hurt, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is Jacob deGrom. It could be John Gray. It could be Andrew Heaney. Probably it could be Jake Odorizzi. Just kind of sucks for a while and you want to improve him. It also leaves the door where Dane Dunning is, at this point, I think your number 6 starter, which, again, he did have hip surgery at the end of the year. They were projecting for him to be ready for opening day, but who knows how that is all going to shake out. Maybe it would give him a little bit more of a cushion to come back on his own time. Maybe the Rangers even go with a 6-man rotation with some of these guys, being a little more, you being a little more concerned about their injuries. Honestly, most of this rotation at this point, outside of, Perez and Odorizzi, I'm like a little worried about their health. And so if you go with a 6-man rotation, you're asking less of these guys, you're asking less of your bullpen, and I think that might end up being a good solution for this. You'd have to be a little bit more creative with how you use your bench and how many players you had in your bullpen and what pitchers those are. But I do think that could be an option for the Rangers, and it moves, the Glenn Otto and Cole Reagans into the 7 and 8-ish spots where I think that's probably where they should be. It could end up changing. They could end up having really, really great seasons and kind of force their way into knocking out one of Odorizzi or Dunning in the rotation, or it would move Andrew Heaney into being probably a really, really nasty reliever if you did want to go that route. The Rangers already do have a whole lot of lefty relievers that are really nasty, so I don't know exactly how much interest they would have in that, but it could be kind of a tandem start thing. I think that might end up being what happens pairing an Odorizzi and an Andrew Heaney, because neither of those guys have gone super deep in their starts last year, and they have each had their problems when they go through the rotation or through the batting order too many times. They're seen too many times in the same game. That's where they start to get into trouble. And I think that those two, having a righty and lefty, switch off. So if they set the lineup all for the lefties and then you bring in the righty, it kind of throw things off. Or you set a lineup full of lefties and then you bring in Andrew Heaney for 3-4 innings as a kind of tandem starter, then your opponent's going to have to make a whole lot of changes and completely screw up their entire plan for the game. So I think that could be a little bit more of a reasoning to go do that. But I do still think this means the Rangers cannot be done on the starting rotation, as decent as I think that is. And I really think this is a pretty solid, the makings of a solid rotation in deGrom, Perez, Gray, Heaney, Odorizzi. I think that's fine. I think it's pretty solid, actually. But I do want the top end to be a little bit better. If you sign somebody who you think is a number 2 and Martin Perez just outperforms them, then great. Fantastic. Love that. Absolutely fine. But I think if you're planning on him, repeating next year and you're not signing anyone better because you think he's going to do exactly that next year, I think that's a little bit of fool's gold, and I think that's not quite what you should be banking on. If it happens, great, and I think he's not falling back as much as people think, but I also am of the mindset that another top end of the rotation pitcher, whether it's Senga or Carlos Rodon or a trade for some other person, I think that might need to be the route that they go. Coming up, we're going to get a little bit more into Andrew Heaney and a little bit at other pitchers that are going to factor in and what this kind of looks like having a deeper staff versus more of a top end focused staff. But first, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. We have got it all at BetOnline.net. Always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. If you were betting on the Rangers signing Arson Judge, I don't know if y'all saw that typo from John Heyman. Very, very fun. He said that Arson Judge was signing with the Giants and then deleted it and then said the Giants hadn't even spoken with Judge or something like that. But if you're thinking the Rangers could get in on that sweepstakes on yesterday's show, then you can go check out what Grant Schiller and I had to say on that and a variety of other topics. Or if you're just wanting to bet on those Rangers futures odds, because this Andrew Heaney signing has put you over the top and sure that the Rangers are going to make the playoffs next year, head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more, because BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Now, let's take a look at the depth approach of the rotation, because I think that kind of signals this is where the Rangers are going. You want to have a lot of pretty quality starters, a lot of guys who are going to eat up innings and going to have a pretty decent bullpen, which I think they are at this point, and rely on just not beating themselves. Well, there are some flaws to that strategy, but I think if the Rangers had this rotation, sub out deGrom. Just sub out deGrom. If you look at the back half of this rotation, the additions of Heaney and Odorizzi, I think if they had this rotation last year, then they are definitely pushing 500, much closer to their Pythagorean record, or even improving that. Because the reason the Rangers got beat so badly down the stretch last year is not because the offense wasn't good. I mean, Nathaniel Lowe lit the entire earth on fire for the month of August. I still think he should have won August Player of the Month in the American League, but that's neither here nor there. Marcus Semien was fantastic in the second half. Corey Seager was pretty excellent all year round, and same with Adolis Garcia. Like they had bats, they had the offense to get things done, but the pitching staff, the bullpen, I think is getting a little more flack than it deserved, because the bullpen had to work so hard. There were so many guys that had to cycle through and were just flat out freaking exhausted by the end of the year. And just by having a solid rotation where you have, if somebody goes down with an injury and you go down and say Dane Dunning starts the year in AAA, if you go down for Dane Dunning to be the guy to replace somebody in the starting rotation, then I think that's a good place for you to be. If Glenn Otto is like your second choice for someone to go down in the rotation, like, okay, well, we're really hurting on starters, and I guess we're going to give Glenn Otto a shot here, then I think that's a good place to be. If you're not forcing Cole Reagans to come up to the big leagues, if you're not having to make a desperation sign of Dallas freaking Keuchel in the year of our Lord 2022, when he had been straight up horrendous for two other teams at that point, then I think that is a much, much better way to build a starting rotation. It's not as flashy. I still think even if you add a Chris Bassett, maybe he doesn't even slot in ahead of Perez. Maybe he's in between Gray and Martin. Maybe he's ahead of them. Maybe he's the number 2. I don't know. I still think if he comes in and he is your number 4, or one of Perez or Gray, John Gray, are your number 4, that is when you start to look at the rotation and say, okay, that is a group that could compete with some of the higher-ish, but not, god tier teams in the American League. That's a team that can compete with the Mariners. It can compete with the Blue Jays. It can compete with, well, whoever is finishing second in the AL East, because Lord knows it's anybody's guess with how deep that division is right now. But the Rangers division is pretty darn deep too. It seems like the Angels are probably going to spend big on another free agent. Surely that will work out for them. They have never had some bad luck with signing big free agent contracts in the recent to not so recent memory. Definitely think that everything could go great for them there. They are also, Artie Moreno is also selling the team, so maybe, unfortunately, things will start to turn around for the Angels. But the Rangers cannot afford to stop spending. I talked about this on Monday's show. I think this would give me a lot more peace of mind if the Rangers do go and get Carlos Rodon. If they have, if this pushes Odorizzi kind of out of the rotation. If you have, 3 really quality left-handed starters, it's big leaguers who are left-handed have had a real difficult time as of late hitting against left-handed pitchers. So if you have 3 of those bad boys in your division, I think that is a really good place to be, because Yordan Alvarez and Kyle Tucker are unfortunately really good, and the Rangers are going to see them quite a bit. So is Shohei Ohtani, who the Rangers are going to see quite a bit. So is I'm trying to think of somebody in the, well, it's not Jesse Winker anymore for the Seattle Mariners, but there are other good left-handed hitters who the Rangers will be seeing quite often, and having 3 quality starting left-handed pitchers in your rotation, where if Andrew Heaney is your number 5, that is a really darn good rotation. I don't know if he will end up being in there or if the Rangers will go get a Chris Bassett, but you know who Andrew Heaney, new and improved version of Andrew Heaney, was number 5 in their rotation. That was the Los Angeles Dodgers this most recent year. That's how good, well, granted, I should say he was the 5th most started player in their rotation. Maybe he wasn't necessarily the actual number 5, but I kind of think that he was. It went, Julio Urias, Tony Gonsolin, Clayton Kershaw, Tyler Anderson. When Walker Buehler was healthy, ahead of him, so he was kind of the 6th best starter, but made the 5th most innings as a starting pitcher, if that makes sense. And you look at that, if you look at that Dodgers starting rotation, they only had 2 guys pitch over 150 innings. That could end up being the case for the Texas Rangers this year. This could be kind of a mark. Not the Rangers have the same quality, though I do think that Jacob deGrom is better. No disrespect, Clayton Kershaw, but I do think that he is better than anybody on that Dodgers pitching staff. But you look at what they did and how they were able to win so many games. They did have a pretty darn good bullpen, I think a little bit better than the Rangers have. Obviously, the top 3 of their order, and, well, the entire depth of their order, the Rangers don't have, well, Freddie Freeman and Will Smith and Trey Turner, Max Muncy, where they can put Mookie Betts. Also, it just happens to be there. And their 8th best hitter, or their number 8 hitter, was former MVP Cody Bellinger, who, again, probably did deserve to be hitting 8th. But still, I think you see what the Dodgers did there with the depth approach of the rotation. They did have Julio Urias, who was really darn good and finished top 3 in Cy Young voting. I think 2nd, actually. Gonsolin was pretty darn good. He only pitched 130 innings in 24 starts. Clayton Kershaw only pitched 126 innings, and, well, they would have liked to have gotten more from Walker Buehler than 65 innings, but still, that was enough to be really darn good. I don't think the Rangers have the offense to have necessarily a 111-win season like the 2022 Dodgers did, but going with a similar mindset in the pitching approach, I think definitely could yield some benefits for this Texas Rangers team. But I also do think that getting Chris Bassett and Brandon Nimmo are now a higher priority, or maybe they could sign Joey Gallo to a multi-year deal because they are really believers in him dominating without the shift, which I'm definitely a proponent of that. If you want to give Joey Gallo a multi-year deal, which I don't think a whole lot of teams are willing to do. But if one team did, I think it would make sense for it being the Rangers. I've talked enough about my old son, Joey, but I think Chris Bassett and Carlos Rodon for sure have to be higher priority after this. And if it makes it more likely that the Rangers are able to sign Brandon Nimmo as well, as just a nice little luxury piece to throw in there, maybe have him hitting 5th or 6th or whatever in this lineup, that would be just unreasonably good. I think that would be a great, great place. It's not a flashy signing. It is definitely a risky signing, but also risk insurance, which doesn't make a lot of sense until you really, really think about it. But that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Rangers. I will be back tomorrow doing a crossover with Ryan Finkelstein of Locked On Mets. It was supposed to happen today. Issues happen. It'll be put off till tomorrow. Jacob deGrom's still going to be a Ranger tomorrow, so we'll have plenty to talk about there. But for your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing, and until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.